Hi, my name is Scott and welcome. This presentation is on diet planning. It will provide a foundation to help us learn how to make better food choices. I'm going to cover 6 topics: principles of planning a diet, guides to planning a diet, dietary reference intakes, the exchange list, nutritional food labels, and nutrition claims that are on those food labels. So starting with principles of planning a diet. The principles of planning a diet. This is a very well-known phrase: consume a variety of foods balanced by a moderate intake of each food. What does that mean? Variety. It means consume a variety of foods within and among each of the food groups. The food groups being fruits, vegetables, dairy, grains, and protein. So you want to eat a variety of foods within a food group and among the food groups because you might become deficient in a nutrient. For example, meat has protein and iron, but it has very little calcium. Whereas milk has calcium, but neither one of these have fiber. So if you eat carrots, for example, carrots have fiber and vitamin A, but if that's the only vegetable you consume, then you're going to be deficient in folate, whereas broccoli and asparagus will provide you with a folate. So balance means to consume the foods in proportion to one another and into the body's needs. So again, eating the variety of foods, don't eat them out of proportion. Eat them balanced within each other. That way your body will receive the nutrients that it needs. Moderation is basically just calorie control. It's controlling your portion sizes in foods such that contain fats, sugars, sodium, alcohol, and again, control the portion sizes. Consume enough of these, but not too much of these substances. Nutrient density. Nutrient density is a measure of the nutrients a food provides relative to the energy it provides. So we're looking at proteins, vitamins, and minerals as it is related to the amount of calories that food has. You want more proteins, vitamins, and minerals in relationship to the amount of calories it has, and that will give you a nutrient density ratio. A high ratio will give you a high nutrient density, and a low ratio will give you a ratio that provides more calories than it does the nutrients that we're looking at. So a diet of nutrient-dense foods can provide all the needed nutrients while controlling the calories. Empty calorie foods are foods that provide energy but lack nutrients such as proteins, vitamins, and minerals. The USDA has defined or set forth the type of foods that they consider nutrient-dense foods, and those are all vegetables, fruits, whole grains, seafood, eggs, beans and peas, unsalted nuts and seeds, fat-free and low-fat milk and milk products, and lean meats and poultry. In the past, there was a bit of discrepancy between different organizations of what they considered nutrient-dense foods. And here is a link I've provided you with the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that will discuss this a little more in depth, such as the American Heart Association and the American Cancer Society, looking at different foods as their nutrient density. But we're going to go with the USDA's recognition of these foods here. This is a very simplistic view of nutrient density. This is a soft drink related to a non-fat milk. Each have both 12 fluid ounces. But if we look at the RDA for the energy, this soft drink provides around 8% of the RDA for the number of calories it has in it. Whereas the non-fat milk provides, less than 5% of the energy, but it provides a lot of nutrition. It provides protein, vitamin A, C, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, calcium, and iron. So again, this is a simplistic view of what nutrient density is. I have another a graph a little later I'll show you. So let's go into guides to planning a diet. I'm going to go over 2 guides that help you plan diets. One is the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the USDA Food Guide. The 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans provides evidence-based nutrition information with 23 key recommendations for people ages 2 and older. They serve as a basis for federal food and nutrition education programs. The U.S. Department of Health and the Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture jointly published the dietary guidelines every 5 years since 1980. Right now we're working on the 2010 dietary guidelines, and they are planning for the 2015 dietary guidelines. These are I would like to go over these 23 key recommendations because they provide a foundation again. And once we go over them, you'll see a pattern of the recommendations that are used, not only that they use in the guidelines, but they use also in the food guides. Excuse me. So, balancing calories to manage weight. There's 7 of these, and starting with number 1 is to prevent or reduce overweight and obesity through improved eating and physical activity behaviors. So this is prevention. Control. To control total calorie intake to manage body weight. For people who are overweight or obese, this will mean consuming fewer calories from foods and beverages. Increase physical activity and reduce time spent in sedentary behaviors. Maintain appropriate calorie balance during each stage of life: childhood, adolescence, adulthood, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and older age. Again, choose foods that provide more potassium, dietary fiber, calcium, and vitamin D. These are the nutrients of concern in our American diets. These foods include fruits and vegetables, whole grains, milk, and milk products. Select an eating pattern that meets nutrient needs over time at an appropriate calorie level. Account for all the foods that you eat and beverages consumed and assess how they fit into a total healthy eating pattern. Look at the foods you're eating and do they really fit into this healthy eating pattern of these guidelines that we're going to go over and more of these diet planning guides. Sodium. Reduce daily sodium intake to less than 2,300 milligrams a day. For people who are 51 and older, African Americans of any age, and those who have hypertension, diabetes, or chronic kidney disease, reduce that intake to 1,500 or less milligrams. This 1,500 milligram recommendation applies to about half of the U.S. population, including children and the majority of adults. Fats. Reduce the fat intake, the intake of calories from solid fats and added sugars. Consume less than 10% of calories from saturated fatty acids. So if you're on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, that will be less than 200 kilocalories from saturated fatty acids, replacing them with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are plant oils. Consume less than 300 milligrams per day of dietary cholesterol. Keep trans fatty acid consumption as low as possible by limiting foods that contain synthetic sources of trans fats, such as partially hydrogenated oils, and by limiting other solid fats. Use oils to replace solid fats where possible. Okay, this is a picture of a grain. First, I want to start off with this. A grain contains a bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Now, when they refine these grains, they take out the bran and the germ, and you're left with the endosperm. The endosperm contains mostly carbohydrates, some proteins, and some B vitamins. But when you take out the bran and the germ, you're losing about 30% protein and around 17 of additional nutrients. So limit the consumption of foods that contain refined grains, especially refined grains, foods that contain solid fats, added sugars, and sodium. Consume at least half of all grains as whole grains. Increase whole grain intake by replacing refined grains with whole grains. Okay, again, this is another graphical representation I have of nutrient density in a way, and also it shows you the percent of nutrients in 3 different types of breads, either whole grain, enriched, or unenriched, the whole grain being green. Now, if we look at whole grain bread, it's at 100% for all these nutrients: iron, niacin, thiamine, riboflavin, folate, vitamin B6, magnesium, zinc, and fiber especially. So it's at 100%. Now, whenever they refine these grains and you come up with a bread and then they enrich it with additional nutrients, enriched bread, that's the yellow, it still doesn't meet what you have for whole grains. However, it does exceed 100% in thiamine, riboflavin, and folate, but it is relatively less, and especially less with the fiber. And none of these, even if it's not enriched, can't compete with a whole grain, including the unenriched bread. So again, whole grain would be more nutrient dense as compared to either the enriched or the unenriched bread. Fruits and vegetables. Increase your fruit and vegetable intake. We hear this a lot, and the phrase here is 5 a day. Increase your fruit and vegetable intake by 5 fruits and or vegetables every day. This is because they have the vitamins that act as antioxidants, minerals, and fibers such as soluble and insoluble fibers. Eat a variety of vegetables, especially dark green, red, and orange vegetables, and beans and peas. The darker the better. The darker is because it has more phytochemicals, which act as antioxidants, and some act like hormone-like compounds. Dairy products. Increase intake of fat-free or low-fat milk and milk products, such as milk, yogurt, cheese, or fortified soy beverages. Protein foods. Choose a variety of protein foods, which include seafood, lean meat and poultry, eggs, beans and peas, soy products, and unsalted nuts and seeds. Increase the amount and variety of seafood consumed by choosing seafood in place of some meat and poultry. Replace protein foods that are higher in solid fats with choices that are lower in solid fats and calories and or sources of oils. And the last two, alcohol. If alcohol is consumed, it should be consumed in moderation, up to 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men, providing you're of legal drinking age. Food safety. Follow food safety recommendations when preparing and eating foods to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. This, you can't say it enough, wash your hands. It's not to wash your hands to protect yourself from the dirty foods. It's to clean your hands before you handle the foods from preventing getting pathogens into the food and having them proliferate. Also, keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold. If you're keeping cold foods cold, it's below 40 degrees, and hot foods is above 140 degrees. Keep them hot. Don't take foods out of the freezer and let them thaw on the counter. Put them in the refrigerator and let them fall. That way they will remain at 40 degrees. Okay, the USDA food guide. Excuse me. Okay, the USDA food guide. In 1894, W.O. Atwater made connections of food composition, dietary intake, and health. He stated a one-sided or badly balanced diet of either protein or fuel ingredients, such as carbs or fat, may not be felt at once, but sooner or later they are surely to appear as fatty tissue, general debility, or actual disease. Now, in 1894, Atwater's already looking at nutrient density. He's considering that protein, even though protein is a fuel source, he's trying to balance that with the main fuel sources, carbohydrates and lipids, because proteins we won't use until the last resource. So he's recognizing the importance of proteins and trying to decrease your calories related to the protein. This promoted the ongoing theme of variety, balance, and moderation. Okay, the USDA food guide goes back a long ways. Again, like I said, in the late 1800s, Atwater, he made food composition tables, which eventually led up to the first food guide, and in the 1940s, this was called the Basic 7. This Basic 7, it had 3 vegetable groups and 2 dairy groups. Basically, the vegetable groups were divided by the color of the vegetables, and the dairy was by milk and butters and fats. So eventually that led into 1956 and the 1970s, the Basic 4. They consolidated the 3 vegetable groups and the 2 dairy groups, and it came up to the 4 food groups. That went on for a period of time, and then into 1979 to 1984, we came up with a hassle-free food groups. This was the food guide. What they did was they ended up breaking up the dairy and looking at fats and oils as another food group, with the fruits and vegetables still remaining as one group. Then later, in 1984 to 1982, they came up with the food wheel. This is the 5 food groups that we are running off of now, 5 food groups and oils and fats. Then we moved on to a little bit more in depth and trying to let consumers recognize the need for the consumption of each one of these food groups. And they gave serving sizes in each one of these food groups and used sparingly with the oils on the top. Now this may have become a little overwhelming for some people looking at the grain as 6 to 11 servings. So then we moved on into 2005 and 2011 with My Pyramid. That more or less personalized your dietary intake, with still remaining with the 5 food groups. Now, we progressed a little further in, based on the 2010 dietary guideline for Americans, we came up with the My Plate. This represents the 5 food groups, the fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, and dairy. When I look at this pictorial representation of a food plate, the first thing that I see is fruits and vegetables. It is a different shape to help grab consumers' attention with the new visual cue. The icon serves as a reminder for healthy eating. The visual is linked to food and is a familiar mealtime symbol in consumers' minds as it was identified through testing. It's not intended to provide specific messages. My Plate, again, fruits and vegetables cover half of the plate. Grains cover a little more than a quarter of the plate, with protein covering the remainder of the plate, and a cup of dairy is provided. The benefits of My Plate. It translates science into practical terms. All the science that I presented in the first presentation, an overview of the science of nutrition, all that science, the studies from the national survey studies, the NHANES studies, all that science and data comes together and it's translated into this plate. It helps people meet these nutritional needs for carbohydrates, protein, fat, and vitamins and minerals. It suggests a pattern of food choices. So when you look at it, you're automatically looking at your choices of food when you see this plate at every meal. It incorporates foundations of a healthy diet, again, variety, balance, and moderation. The limitations of My Plate, it's not for children under 2 years of age. It's not intended, like I said, to provide specific messages because it doesn't have food serving sizes, and it does not address the types of foods to choose within each group. For example, vegetables, it doesn't say a baked potato versus broccoli. It shows how to build a healthy plate per meal, but it does not address the total diet. You know, when you're consuming foods, you look at your diet within the day, and you do the calculations for the day to see if you have balanced variety, your foods for the day. However, what this will do is keeps you on track at every meal. Okay, My Plate will include vitamin C rich foods every day, include plant proteins several times a week, include dark green vegetables every day, choose fat-free or low-fat options, include plant oils daily, eat fish at least 2 times a week, choose whole grain products. This is the USDA food guide for the daily amount of a calorie intake. It starts off with 1,000 kilocalorie intake and up to 3,200 kilocalories. And it goes by food group. So if you're a normal, average, male, healthy male, you'll consume probably around 2,400 kilocalories. So you look at your intakes of each one of these food groups. For example, fruits at 2,400, you'll need approximately 2 cups of fruit per day. And with vegetables, you should be looking at around 3 cups of vegetables per day, as goes with each of the other food groups. This is a very good tool to help us diet plan. In addition to this, they have at the bottom, they have discretionary calorie allowance. This is, you can look at this as something like empty calories to give yourself a little leeway. And for a 2,400 kilocalorie diet, you have a leeway of about 362 kilocalories per day. Now, this is broken down a little further in the fruits and vegetables. They are subgrouped, and this is the amounts per week. So in a week, if you're on a 2,400 kilocalorie diet, the dark green vegetables you want to consume is 3 cups a week. And you can see the orange, the legumes, starchy, and other vegetables, the number of vegetables you should consume, the types of vegetables you should consume in a week. Okay, now I want to go over the dietary reference intakes. Excuse me. Okay, the DRIs, dietary reference intakes, they're a system of nutrition recommendations from the Institute of Medicine for healthy people in the U.S. and Canada, and they're used for planning and assessing diets. First, we're going to start with the RDAs, the recommended dietary intakes, then adequate intakes. I have a little chart I would like to show you to compare both the RDAs and the AIs, and then we're going to look at tolerable upper level intakes, estimated average requirements, estimated energy requirements, and the daily values that are on food labels, and I'll cover that when we go over the food labels. So starting with RDA, the recommended dietary allowance is the average daily amount of a nutrient considered adequate to meet the known, now this is the key phrase for the RDAs, is the known nutrient needs of practically all healthy people. This is a dietary goal for individuals. This is a goal, and it says for practically all healthy people. If this was a normal distribution, that practically all healthy people, and I have a graph I'll show you in a few minutes, would be around 98%, so practically all healthy people. It is backed by a lot of experimental research. Adequate intakes are the average daily amount of a nutrient that appears sufficient to maintain a specified criterion. It is a value used as a guide for nutrient intake when an RDA cannot be determined. This still requires more research. The tolerable upper level intake, or upper intake level, the ULs, is the maximum daily amount of a nutrient that appears safe for most healthy people. It appears safe for most healthy people, and beyond which there is an increased risk of adverse health effects. These are nutrients that have information on toxicities. Now this is a chart. I don't want it to overwhelm you. Basically, I want to look at just 2 of the colors, the pink and the blue. This is separated. The first 4 columns are the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. And I just want you to recognize that there are RDAs for the first 3, the A, D, and E. There are RDAs for the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and E. There is no RDA, and they're using AIs, adequate intakes, for vitamin K. For the water-soluble vitamins, we have RDAs for thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. We don't have an RDA. We use AIs for pantothenic acid, and we do have RDAs for vitamin B6, B12, and folate. But we use AIs, adequate intakes, for biotin and the quasi-vitamin choline. So the dietary reference intakes, again, further, is estimated average requirements. This is the average daily amount of a nutrient that will maintain a specific biochemical or physiological function in half of the healthy people. The key phrase is for EARs is in half of the healthy people. And I will point this out on a graph I have coming up next. In a given age and gender group. The EER, estimated energy requirements, is the average dietary energy intake that maintains energy balance and good health in persons of a given age, gender, weight, height, and physical activity level. So you're going to look at these parameters to estimate these energy requirements. And I have a link here. It's a very good article from the National Institute of Health, and it even provides an Excel sheet that you can input your energy and activity levels and come up with your estimated energy requirements. The daily values, again, I'll go over this more in depth on the food labels, but briefly, daily values are used on nutrition facts labels on nearly all packaged foods and processed meat products. It's a guide for comparing the nutrients of a food to approximate human needs. is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie level and is kilocalorie diet for ages 4 years through adulthood. Okay, this is the graph I was telling you about. Here we're going to start with the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. This is known nutrient needs based on a lot of research, and the normal distribution here is right around 98%. Here we have the upper limit, and that's where you start to increase in toxicities. And 20% less of the RDA is the estimated average requirement. And as this normal distribution comes down to 0.5, which is 50% in half of the healthy people. So this adequate intake is a little vague. This is an article that I pulled up from the Food and Nutrition Board, that they're the one that sets the dietary reference intakes, the DRIs. So this article says that the adequate intake is assumed to lie beyond the RDA, but is potentially slightly below. That's why I have the red arrow a little bit past. It is a vaguely defined number, and in many ways not very useful. So stick with the RDAs if you can, estimate average requirements, and recognize the upper level intakes. Okay, this is an acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges for macronutrients again. They are ranges of intakes for energy nutrients that provide adequate energy and nutrients and reduce the risk of chronic disease. So here we have carbohydrates in between 45 to 65%. This provides, the carbohydrates upper limit is set to help you acquire the nutrients that you need in other foods. It's kind of high, but it's set to make sure you acquire the nutrients. The calories from fat, it's 20 to 35%, and the lower value is set to make sure you don't overpass your intake of trans fatty acids, saturated fat, and solid fats. The 10 to 35% of protein, this protein level seems kind of high, but it is set to balance both of the two, the carbohydrates and the fats, dependent upon your diet. And this is a very good article I've referenced related to these the AMDRs, acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. Excuse me. Okay, let's do an example of this. If you have an AMDR and the protein is in between 10 and 35%, if you look at a man that is on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, how many grams of protein should he consume in one day? So you'll get the two parameters. First, you'll look at the 10% and the 35%, and you'll multiply each of those. You'll turn the percent into a decimal, which is 0.10, and the 35 into 0.35, and multiply each by the 2,000 kilocalories in a day, and you'll come up with the total calories, the parameters of the total calories, being at 200 kilocalories and one at 700 kilocalories. Now, to get the grams, you simply divide that by the kilocalories per gram, which for the case of protein would be 4 grams per kilocalorie per gram. And you would divide that 200 by 4, and you'll come up with 50. And the 700 by 4, which will give you the upper end range of 175 grams of protein per day according to the AMDR. Okay, so this is a protein calculation. Again, the USDA recommends 15% protein per day. So for a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, how much is protein intake per day? So we'll change the 15% to a decimal and then multiply that by the 2,000 kilocalories per day and come up with 300 kilocalories of protein in a day. So then we'll divide that by 4 because we know protein is 4 kilocalories per gram, and we'll come up with 75 grams of protein per day. Now, another way to calculate protein needs is in clinical nutrition. for a normal person in healthy weight, they usually calculate it at 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for a man that is weighing 170 pounds, you'll change that into the metric system, and we know that 2.2 kilograms is approximately 1 pound. So therefore, you'll take the 170 and divide it by 2.2, and you come up with 77 kilograms. And then you'll multiply that by the 0.8 grams per kilogram in the body weight and come up with 61 grams of protein per day. Okay, we looked at nutrient density and related that to the quality of food, dependent upon how many nutrients it has, and relating that to the least amount of calories that food would have, coming up with the nutrient density ratio. Here is energy-dense foods, and it's a comparison of the kilocalories with the weight of the food. Now, I've chosen two nutrition facts labels. One is a candy bar, and the other one is a low-fat pudding. And the candy bar weighs 45 grams, and it has 230 calories. And the low-fat pudding, it weighs 110 grams, and it has 100 calories per serving. So if we look at the energy density of each of these, we'll take the calories over the weight of it, the grams, in each one, and you'll notice that the low-fat pudding, it weighs more than twice as much as the serving of the chocolate bar. But it has less than half of the calories that the chocolate bar has. So you'll get the energy density of the chocolate bar is 5.1 kilocalories per gram. And the energy density of the low-fat pudding is 0.9 kilocalories per gram, which is a much less energy-dense food than the chocolate bar. And this is because the chocolate bar has more fat and less water. Okay, so we went over the exchange groups, the starch exchange, the meat and meat substitute exchange, and the fat exchanges. And we saw how each one of those were broken down within them, and we were shown how you could calculate the carbohydrates, protein, fat, and the kilocalories within each one of those exchanges. Now, here is the number of, it's a chart with the number of exchanges per day for the various calorie levels. So for example, if you're on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet and you look at the number of starches you'll need on that level of kilocalories, it's 11 starches. So you'll know that the starch exchange is 15 grams of carbohydrates, and then you'll just multiply that by 11, coming up with approximately 165 grams of starch, and then you can calculate the number of kilocalories within each one of these exchange groups. And here is a link that I provided that will help you learn more about the individual foods and their measurements for their exchanges. Okay, this is a graph representation of the typical American diet compared to the recommended intake levels of in 2010. Basically, it's showing that we are not meeting our goals. Eat more of these whole grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy, seafood, oils, fiber, potassium, vitamin D, and calcium. Eat more of these because we are under par for our goal. Now, what we do consume too much of is the calories from solid fats, added sugars, refined grains, sodium, and saturated fats. This shows that we're almost at 300% for solid fats and added sugars, which is a big problem in the typical American diet. Again, refined grains also. Okay, let me go over exchange lists. This is the diabetic exchange lists are a meal planning guide that shows the number of food choices to eat at each meal. All choices on each list are equal. Any food on the list can be exchanged or traded for any other food on the list. And they're looking at this between the calories and the grams of fat, and they're pretty much equal in all the calories. So it's categorized by energy-yielding nutrients. The lists are grouped into three main groups: the carbohydrate group, meat and meat substitute group, and the fat group. And here again, I have a link to the diabetic exchange lists. So the groups are divided again to the carbohydrate, meat, and meat substitutes, and the fat group. The carbohydrate group is probably the biggest because it contains both vegetables, fruit, dairy, starches, and other carbohydrates such as sweets, snacks, and stuff like that. The meat and meat substitute group is basically broken down by its fat content. It's very lean, medium fat, high fat, or some type of meat substitute. And the fat groups are basically oils, butter, mayonnaise, salad dressing, stuff like that. And they are grouped by the monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated fats. So let's take a look at each one of these. One starch exchange. Okay, and I have a graph here. Basically, you'll look that one starch exchange is approximately 15 grams of carbohydrates. Now that will differ a little bit in its protein content, whereas in the milks, the fat-free, reduced fat, and whole milk, all of these, one exchange, 8 ounces, is 12 grams of carbohydrates. And it will contain also 8 grams of protein in each. And the fat differs a little bit because it's fat-free, reduced, and whole. And that will coincide with the number of calories it provides. So let me point out a couple of them. A half a cup of cereal, grain, or starchy vegetables is one starch exchange. 1 ounce of bread product, such as one slice of bread, is one starch exchange. A half a cup of rice or pasta. I'm sorry, 1/3 a cup of rice or pasta is one starch exchange. At one fruit exchange is 1 small to medium fresh fruit, a half cup of canned or fresh fruit or fruit juice, or a 1/4 cup of dried fruit is one starch exchange. 3/4 to 1 ounce of most snack foods is a starch exchange, and 3 servings of vegetables are equivalent to 1 carbohydrate serving. Now, this is just several of the starch exchanges I pointed out. Again, there is a huge list of all these foods, but this is the general outlook on what one starch exchange is. One meat and meat substitute exchange. Again, they categorize these by the amount of fat that it contains, and which provides the number of kilocalories. So a very lean meat, there's no carbohydrates in the meats, and you'll have 7 grams of protein. This is based on 1 ounce of meat, fish, poultry, or cheese, or a half a cup of beans, peas, and lentils because they have fat within them. So you can see the very lean meat has, a little bit of fat, almost 1 gram of fat, whereas high-fat foods have 8 grams of fat, and you remember 9 kilocalories per gram, so that's considerable, and again, the number of calories. So one fat exchange is 1 teaspoon of regular margarine or mayonnaise or vegetable oil, 1 tablespoon of regular salad dressing or reduced fat mayonnaise, or 2 tablespoons of reduced fat salad dressings. Now the fat group is very simple to look at. One serving again of these is 5 grams of fat, and the number of kilocalories times 9 is 45 kilocalories per that one fat exchange. Now this is just general, these categories I just showed you and these exchanges. If you're interested in planning your diets through these, go to the link that I provided, and it has lengthy, detailed information on foods and their exchanges. Okay, nutrition food labels. Another way to help plan your diets is through these nutrition food labels. A lot of people use these now. I think it's up to 50–60% of Americans now are looking at the food labels, trying to decide better choices between the 2 comparison foods. So nutrition food labels use a generic standard called the daily value. The percent daily value on the nutrition food facts label is a guide to the nutrients in one serving of the food item. It is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet for healthy people 4 years of age through adulthood. The daily values are set at close to the highest RDA values or related nutrient standard for respective age and gender categories. The daily values have been set for carbohydrates, protein, vitamins, minerals, sodium, and fiber. The daily values for fat and cholesterol represent the maximum level, and this is not a goal to attain. And here I've provided a link for from the FDA that regulates these food labels. Okay, this is a typical nutrition facts label on the back of a food package. I'm going to break it apart in sections and then we'll put it back together as we go through each one of these sections. So the top section is it is the serving size and serving per container. The FDA has established that all same type products must have the same serving size. For example, all beverages are measured in 8 fluid ounces. All ice creams are measured in half cups. This way you can make comparison shopping with the nutrient densities. Serving sizes are to be in standard household measures and metric measures. So you have a cup is a household measure, and in metric measures the number of grams. So that is the serving size and servings per container. Next, we look at the total food energy in calories and the food energy from fat calories. And we'll have each there. And the next section we'll look at is the fat section. We'll look at the total fat, and that is in grams and the percent daily value. So you'll see the number of grams that it has, and it will show you the percent daily value. And I'll go over a second in what the percent daily values are for each of the nutrients. Saturated fat in grams in percent daily values. Trans fat is only in grams because you're not trying to meet any requirements. And cholesterol is in milligrams and percent daily values. The next small section is sodium, and that is in milligrams and percent daily value. So we'll show you the milligrams and its percent daily value. We'll go over how to calculate these in a few seconds. The next section is the carbohydrates. It's composed of the total carbohydrates, which includes the starch, sugars, and fiber, and it's in grams and percent daily values. And it has dietary fiber, which is in grams and percent daily values, and the sugars, which includes the natural sugars and any added sugars in the package. Next section is the protein. The protein is in grams. It doesn't give you a percent daily value, and that's because it would cost the food industries, the manufacturers, to do a protein quality test to find out how good of a protein quality it is. Okay, and the next section is the vitamins, and what is required on these food labels is vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, and calcium, and each one of these are in the percent daily values. And then last here we have the footnote. This is usually on the larger packages. The smaller packages won't have this footnote, but it kind of shows you what the percent daily value is for the fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium. And here is the percent daily values. This is the chart that I'm providing you to show you what it is for the percent daily values. And we're going to go over each one of these in depth here in the next couple slides to help you understand more about nutrition food labels. Okay, excuse me. So starting off with calculation percent daily values for micronutrient values of a 2,000 kilocalories per day. Now this is, we're going to look at the micronutrients, and these daily values are based on the 2,000 kilocalorie, and they're broken down for each one of the nutrients as far as carbohydrates, fat, and protein as 60, 30, and 10% respectively. So how do we calculate these out of this? So they're showing us that 30% again of the fat of a 2,000 kilocalorie diet is 65 grams. So let's do that. Here's an example. 30% of 2,000 kilocalories, simply you'll turn the percent into a decimal and multiply that. You'll come up with 600 kilocalories. And then again, since this is fat, we divide it by 9. It comes up to 66.66. And they round this to 65 grams for your percent daily value of fat. Also, with saturated fat, you're looking at 10% of the 2,000 kilocalories. So that's 0.10 times 2,000 equals 400 kilocalories. And you divide that again by 9, and it's 22.22, which is rounded to 20 grams, your percent daily value of saturated fat. Here's an example for carbohydrates. It is 60% of a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, so you turn that into 0.60 times 200, and you get 1,200, and carbohydrates yield 4 kilocalories per gram, so you divide that, and you get 300 grams is your daily value, percent daily value for carbohydrates. And protein, this is the last one I have for the macronutrients. Again, this is, you turn the percent, 10% into a decimal, 0.10 times 2,000 is 200 kilocalories, and you divide that by the 4, because the protein is 4 kilocalories per gram, and you come up with 50 grams for the daily value. And again, protein here is the percent daily value for protein. So that's how they come up with percent daily values. And what about daily values for micronutrients? Here we're looking down at the lower part, and we're going to calculate 2 of these for micronutrients. So, for example, sodium. They're giving you the percent daily value on the packages. So how do you know how many grams that is, or how many milligrams, I'm sorry, for micronutrients? It's 0.3 times 24, in this case would be 720 micrograms at 30% of the 2,400. Very simple, straightforward calculation. And vitamin A, this is in micrograms, and if a package has 6% of your 1,500 micrograms of your percent daily value, if you wonder what 6% is, it's 6% times 1,500 will give you 90 micrograms per day of your in that package for your percent daily value. Okay, the daily value again is based on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet. What about a 2,400 kilocalorie diet for micronutrients? A normal teenager and an adult male in good health consumes approximately 2,400 kilocalories a day. Therefore, macronutrient calculation for fat, would be, okay, if you're looking at fat, you do the 30%, which would be 0.3, times the 2,400. And then you'll get the number of kilocalories, and you simply divide that by 9, and then you'll know that you need 80 grams per day of fat. That's on a 2,400 kilocalorie diet. So what about a 2,400 kilocalorie diet for micronutrients? Here again, we're going to look at vitamin A, and we're going to look at iron. How would you calculate the amounts you'll need on one serving? The amounts you'll get on one serving. So for example, if vitamin A is 1,500 micrograms and you're on a 2,400 kilocalorie diet, you simply multiply the 1,500 times the 24, and you get this big number. You can eliminate some of the zeros, and you then divide that by the 2,000 kilocalorie percent daily values that they have, that they're recommending it by, and you'll get 1,800. Now, on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet, the vitamin A recommendation is 1,500 micrograms. But on a 2,400 kilocalorie diet, the percent daily value will be greater, and that's 1,800 micrograms. So that's a way for you to understand the difference between the diets. Now let's do one on iron. again, if your daily value of iron on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet is 1,800 milligrams, then you'll simply, if you have a caloric restriction, if you're decreasing your calories to 1,800 kilocalories, you'll simply multiply these two together and come up with the number, and then you divide that again by the daily value of 2,000 kilocalories, and that decrease from 18 milligrams on a 2,000 kilocalorie diet to an 1,800 kilocalorie diet will lead you to 16.2 milligrams per day on a 1,800 kilocalorie diet. Okay, the general rule with these nutrition food labels is if it's less than 5%, it is low for that nutrient. If it is between 6 and 19%, it is moderate for that nutrient. If it's greater than 20%, it is considered high for that nutrient. So you want to limit the fat, and it is best if this daily value is under 5% for total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, and even sodium. For dietary fiber, it's best if it is greater than 20% because it is a high source for that nutrient. You want to eat a low source, consume a low source for the nutrient, that you want to limit, and you want to consume greater than 20% for the nutrients that you're trying to get through nutrient-dense foods, such as vitamin A, C, calcium, and iron. You want that to be greater than 20%. Okay, nutrient claims. These their nutrient claims are statements on food packaging that establish the quantity of a particular ingredient, such as fats, cholesterol, and fiber. Under the Nutrition, Labeling, and Education Act of 1990, the government set strict rules and definitions that a product must meet to make a nutrient claim or a health claim. These statements can be included on food labels only if the food product meets specifications established by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. Okay, at an overall look at calories, sugar, fiber, fat, cholesterol, and sodium, the nutrient claims on these packaging we'll be looking at, for the most part, free, low, and reduced. And that will go for the calories, free, low, and reduced. For sugar, it's free and no added sugar, and again, reduced. For fiber, it's high fiber, good source of fiber, or added fiber. Fat, again, it's free, low, or reduced. And cholesterol is free, low, or reduced. And sodium is free, low, light, or reduced. So these are each of the categories that I'll cover related to nutrient claims. So as far as calorie goes, if it says calorie-free, that product should contain fewer than 5 calories per serving. Low calorie is 40 calories or less per serving. And reduced, or few calories, means that it is at 25% fewer calories per serving than the comparison or reference food. As far as sugar goes, sugar-free is less than ½ a gram of sugar per serving. No added sugar means no sugars were added during the processing or packaging. Reduced sugar is, again, at least 25% less sugar per serving than the reference food. Fiber. Added fiber is at least 2.5 grams more per serving than the reference food. A good source of fiber is in between 2.5 to 4.9 grams per serving. And high fiber is 5 grams or more of fiber per serving. Foods making a high fiber claim must meet the definition for low fat, or the level of total fat must appear next to the high fiber claim. Okay, fat. Fat-free is less than ½ a gram of fat per serving. That includes zero fat, no fat, and non-fat that they will use on the labels. Low fat is 3 grams or less per serving, and if the serving is 30 grams or less, or 2 tablespoons or less per 50 grams of the food, it can be considered low fat. Reduced or less fat, again, it is 25% or less fat than the comparison food. Saturated fat. Less than a half a gram of saturated fat, this is for fat-free, less than half a gram of saturated fat and more than a half a gram, and no more, than a half a gram of trans fat per serving. Low saturated fat is 1 gram or less per serving and not more than 15% of the kilocalories from that saturated fatty acids. Reduced or less saturated fat, that is, again, at least 25% or less per serving than the referenced food. Cholesterol. Cholesterol-free, less than 2 milligrams of cholesterol and 2 grams or less of saturated fat per serving, which would be cholesterol-free. Low cholesterol would be 20 milligrams or less of cholesterol and 2 grams or less of saturated fat per serving, or if the serving is 30 grams or less or 2 tablespoons or less per 50 grams of food, it will be considered low cholesterol. Reduced or less cholesterol, again, is at least 25% less cholesterol than the reference food and 2 grams or less of saturated fat per serving. Sodium. This is sodium-free is less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. Very low sodium is 35 milligrams or less per serving. Low sodium is 140 milligrams or less per serving, and reduced or less sodium, again, is at least 25% less per serving than the referenced food. Okay, general nutrient claims. These are the generalities: fortified, enriched, healthy, light, diet, good source, organic, or natural. We'll go over these. Fortified or enriched. Vitamins and or minerals have been added to the product in amounts in excess of at least 10%. That's fortified or enriched of that normally present in the reference food. As far as enriched goes, it refers to replacing the nutrients that were removed from during the processing, such as iron, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folate. Fortified refers to adding nutrients to the food that were not initially there. Okay, light or light. Fat. A nutritionally altered food contains 1/3 less kilocalories or half the fat of that reference food, and it can be considered light, or another word, light. Or sodium. The sodium of a low-fat or low-calorie food has been reduced by 50% to be considered light. And light may still be used to describe a food color, and the label must explain that intent. Okay, dietetic, artificially sweetened, or sweetened with non-nutritive sweetener. Excuse me. Okay, a food may be labeled this as dietetic, artificially sweetened, or sweetened with a non-nutritive sweetener if the claim is not false or misleading. Good sources means that a serving of the food contains 10 to 19% again of the daily value for a particular nutrient. And high again means 20% or more of the daily value of a specified nutrient. Organic. If the label has organic on it, the FDA states that 90% of that food by weight of the food ingredients do not contain chemical fertilizers, pesticides, genetic engineering like genetic modified organisms, sewage, sludge, antibiotics, and irradiation. If the label says it is made with organic ingredients, then 70% of the ingredients must be organic. As far as animal products goes, animals must graze outdoors. They are fed on organic feed and cannot be exposed to large amounts of antibiotics and growth hormones. Okay, health claims. So if we look at a general overview of the health claims, these are some claims that you'll see on food labeling packages. For example, calcium and vitamin D. Now each one of these you'll have to use the word may or might on the label. So for example, calcium and vitamin D may or might decrease the risk of osteoporosis. Total fat, decreased total fat may or might decrease some cancers. Low saturated fat and low cholesterol may decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. Low sodium and high potassium may decrease the risk of hypertension and stroke, and increased folate might decrease the risk of neural tube defects, and sugarless gum may decrease the risk of tooth decay. So here's an example of a health claim. To make a claim about the relationship between sodium and hypertension, the product must contain 140 milligrams or less of sodium per serving. If the package states that the product may reduce the risk of hypertension, we know that it is a low sodium product because low sodium is also defined as 140 milligrams or less of sodium per serving. Now here I've provided you with a link to the FDA, who regulates the nutrient claims and the health claims, and they'll show you a lot more about what I've went over here. So thank you.